Hello and welcome back to my Game Grid toy box. I'm here with Sorcerer's Apprentice Mickey, and that means it's time for our next episode of Toy Box Tutorials. Last time we began working on a new pinball game, which we're creating over here, and I showed you how to use the remote controller to control the ball and make it move around the field. We're going to continue building this game today by hooking up the scoring. But before we do that, I'm going to be using a new toy in this episode that you haven't seen in this series before. So let's take a quick look at it. It's the Narration Announcer, and you can find this toy in the Creativitoys drawer. This is a new toy that was introduced in Disney Infinity 3.0, and it allows you to play one of several pre-recorded audio clips that were made by the game's narrator. And I'm going to drop one over here so we can take a look at it. I'll put it with these other toys that I dropped ahead of time, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes. But let's open up the logic menu for the Narration Announcer, sorry. And as you can see, there are no properties, and we do have logic connections though. We have one, and it's called Started. So this trigger signal will be broadcast by this toy when another toy invokes this to play one of those voiceovers. And this toy, of course, has some behaviors, so I've got a little button out here I dropped temporarily just to show that. So on the button, we'll do a new logic connection when pressed. Come over to the Narration Announcer. And these are all of the phrases that the narrator can say. Countdown, success, awesome, fantastic, and more. So you can play all of those, and you can also activate or deactivate this toy. If you deactivate it, then anything that you try to do to play one of these will not work until you reactivate the toy. So that's what those two behaviors do. And that's really it. It's a limited set of phrases, so there's not a lot you can do with this toy, but I use it most often to reward the player for doing something great in a game. Using these up here. And so that's what we're going to do today. So now that you know what the Narration Announcer does, let's try it out. And as I said, I'm going to use this toy in my pinball game to reward the player for stringing together a combo of 3 bumper hits in a row. So that's what I'm going to do with it. And the first thing we're going to need to do, though, is place some bumpers and flippers. And I've got a little diagram here that I created for myself, and I'll show you where to place these. It's not overly critical that you place these exactly where I've placed mine, but you want to try to get them close. Of course, there's nothing to prevent you from placing as many as you want, wherever you want in your particular toy box. This is where I placed mine, and I might decide at some point to go back and add a few extras. We're going to place one block out here like that. And we'll take that one out. Okay, so there are those, and then we're going to do the same thing on the other side because we're kind of mirroring this. Again, these are just little helper blocks to help position the bumpers where they need to be. I know some of you like to recreate my toy boxes exactly as I have them, and so that's why I want to do this. And then half a block out from that one. Here we are. And we can take this one out. Okay, let's go over to our other pinball game that we built a while back. I'm going to pick this bumper up and put it down. That helps save me from having to do a lot of scrolling through the drawers to find those toys. Alright, we're going to place this first one right here. The next one is going to sit right off the end of that one. We're going to place one on either side of these, and also on this side. So it's right at the end of those blocks, just like you see there. And then again, we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And then we can take all of these little spacer blocks out. And if you finish building this game after next week's episode and you play it for a little while and you decide you want some additional bumpers in here, go for it. You can get a little bit more bumper action that way. Or if you want to try placing yours in a different position than I've placed mine, move them around a little bit, you can go for it. There we go. There's the bumpers. And then we also need the flippers. So we're going to place one here like this. The same one on the opposite side like that. There. And we're not going to connect those up to anything, which means they're going to happen automatically. So whenever something enters this bounding box, it'll cause these things to flip. All right. And then I've also placed some additional creativitoys out here. You may recall from my playthrough in our last episode that the player only plays on one side of the field at a time. The game is 4 minutes long and it's divided into quarters. So at the end of each quarter, the other side of the field becomes active. So the player is going to start on this side and play over here for the first minute of the game. And once that quarter is done, then this side of the field becomes inactive. This side of the field becomes active, so the player has to get their ball through here to the other side to continue scoring. You can't continue to score any points over here because it's inactive. You have to move the ball to the opposite side, and once round 2 is done, that second quarter is done, then it switches again, and at the end of the third quarter, it switches again. So all of these controls, that's one set of controls, and all of these are another set of controls. So we're going to route each of those through a logic gate. So every bumper that's on this side of the field will come through this logic gate. Every bumper on that side of the field is going to come through this logic gate. And by opening and closing those gates at the end of each quarter, we can control which side of the field will do anything when the ball hits those bumpers. So that's the point of those two logic gates. All right. And then we have our scoreboard. And again, these are all placed out of the Creativitoys drawer. And at this point, all I've done is place them. So I've scrolled through the drawer. I've dropped these out here. And that's all I've done so far. And then for our narration announcer, what I want to have it do is if the player can string together a combo of 3 bumper hits in a row, then we're going to play one of those narrator sounds. And so to handle that, I've got 2 counters and a time delayer here. And I'll get to those shortly. But the first thing we're going to need to do is hook up all of these bumpers. So on the bumper, we'll do a new logic connection when flipped. We're going to come up and input into this gate. And you're going to make these same connections for all of these bumpers. So a new logic connection when flipped. Input into that gate. And normally I would just go ahead and do this offline. But that seemed to confuse a little folks when I did that on my last pinball game. Because this series is for beginners and people who are new to the toy box. So I'm going to go ahead and just hook up all of these. So for those of you who are a little bit more experienced, you can go ahead and fast forward a little bit past this section where I'm hooking all of these up. And those of you who are recreating this, or you want to see everything because you need to see that in order to understand what I'm doing, you can just keep watching. All right, so that's the last one on that side of the field. And now all of those bumpers are all connected to this logic gate. They're all inputting to that gate. Now we do the same thing over here on the blue side. So a new logic connection, when flipped, we come through this logic gate and input. And all of these bumpers are going to be doing the same thing. So having these logic gates in here will also help us simplify the logic connections, because we don't have to make all of these connections for every single bumper. And that can be helpful. You want to try to minimize the amount of work that you have to do, because hooking up logic connections can be kind of tedious. It's not difficult, it's just tedious sometimes. Oops, there we go. I think I got one more. Yeah, that one over there. New logic connection when flipped. Input into that gate. Okay, so every bumper on this side is now inputting into that gate. Every bumper on that side is inputting into that gate. And we're going to control the opening and closing of those gates next time. But for today, each of these gates is basically going to do the same set of things. So on this gate, we're going to do a few things on output. So we're going to do a new logic connection on output. First thing we're going to do is come to our scoreboard, and we'll set this up next time. But we're going to come over here and increment. We're going to increment by 10. The score for player 1. This will be a single player game. Okay? The next thing we want to do is play a sound effect, because again, just like the other pinball game, the camera is going to be way up there, and the player is not going to be close enough to these bumpers to hear the sound that the bumpers make. And so what we want to do is go over to the sound generator. So on the logic gate, a new logic connection on output, we're going to reuse our sound generator from last time. That's over here. We're going to go to the general category, and we're going to look for the ding sound, which is the same sound we used last time. Okay. And then back over to our logic gate. Open the logic menu, do a new logic connection on output. The next thing we're going to do is come over to our counter and increment the counter by 1. And the purpose of the counter is to count the number of hits in a row. And again, when the player scores a combo of 3 hits in a row, we want to play a narrator sound. So this counter, we're going to go into the properties. I'm going to set the target count to be 3. We're going to turn off visible display because the player doesn't need to see this. And we're going to reset on target reached. All right. Now, if there's a certain amount of time between the shots where it's taken too long, then we want to reset this counter, because the shots have to be fairly quick. So we're going to set up this time delayer to do that. So on the time delayer in the properties, I'm going to set the delay time to be 2 seconds. So the player is going to have to score 3 hits in a row within 2 seconds in order to trigger the narrator announcer. And if they take too long to do that, then we want to reset this. Now, you might think you could go ahead and hook this up right away to start the timer. But if the timer is already running, because it's going to be, again, 2-second timer, and I'm trying to get 3 hits in a row, I don't want to keep reactivating this timer. And so we're going to route the calls through a second counter. This is going to be the shot counter, we'll call it. So on the properties for this counter, I'm going to set the target count to 1. So 1 individual shot. We're going to turn off the visible display, and the other 2 properties are fine. And so when a bumper is hit and it comes through this logic gate, once again we'll do a new logic connection on the logic gate on output. We're going to increment this timer as well. We're going to increment it by 1. Okay? And on this counter, the 1-shot counter, we'll do a new logic connection. When the target is reached, okay, we're going to come over to our time delayer and start the delay. So if in that 2-second period of time we get another hit, it's going to come through this counter. The counter's already reached its target. So the counter would now become 2, but it's already reached its target, so it won't broadcast again. So this timer will continue to run, and the fact that we hit a second and a third or even a 4th bumper will not matter. All right? So that's the purpose of that. And then on the timer, we'll do a new logic connection. When the delay is completed, we'll reset this counter. Oops, and we'll reset the other counter. All right. And then on this counter, we'll do a new logic connection. When this target is reached, which is 3, then we'll come over to our narrator announcer and we'll have it say fantastic. All right, so just to review, when we hit a bumper out here, our first bumper, it inputs into this logic gate, and on output we increment the score by 10. We play our sound effect from the sound generator out that way, and then we increment both counters. Okay? So this counter now becomes 1, and this counter now becomes 1. This counter is set with its target count to 1, so this one is going to be triggered right away. And when this one, its target is reached, it will start the time delayer. All right? So if the player fails to get another hit before this timer expires, then when the timer goes off, it's going to reset this counter back to 0, because that's the reset value in the counter. All right? Now, if we hit a bumper and it comes over and sets these counters and increments them again, now they become 1. This one goes off and starts the timer. And then we hit a second bumper. That's going to come through this logic gate. That's going to set this counter to 2, that counter to 2, and nothing is going to happen on either counter because this one has already reached its target of 1, and this one hasn't reached its target yet. Its count is 2. And then we hit a third bumper. That will come through this logic gate. That will increment this counter to 3 now, and that will cause that target to be reached, and it will play the narrator sound. And then shortly thereafter, this timer goes off and resets the counter. But because the counter has this property set, it's already been reset. So we're fine. Okay? So that's the purpose of this little cluster of controls. It's controlling the number, it's counting the number of hits that we get within that 2-second period. And if we can get 3 hits before that timer goes off, then we play our little sound effect, our narrator sound. He'll say fantastic. If we don't get 3 hits before this timer goes off, then the timer resets the counter and we start over again. We have to start over with a fresh set of 3 hits in a row. And so that's what's happening there. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And then this one over here, this logic gate, needs to do the same thing for all of those bumpers. So on this logic gate, a new logic connection on output. Again, we come over to our scoreboard. We increment the score by 10 for player 1. On that logic gate, a new logic connection on output. We play our sound effect. So under the general category, we want to play the ding. That way we can hear when the ball hits those bumpers. On that logic gate, a new logic connection on output. We're going to increment this counter by 1. And a new logic connection on output. We're going to increment the other counter by 1. So each of those gates is doing the exact same thing right now. All right, and then on this scoreboard, let's just go ahead and set the properties for that before we test this out. So the play to on this, we're going to set this to the maximum number possible, which is that. And the rest of those properties are fine. And that's as much as we're going to hook up today. We'll build the rest of the logic next time for the game. But for today, we can go ahead and try this out, and we can delete this button because we're done with that. But let's go over to the remote controller now. Oops, wait. Almost forgot we need our ball. I took our ball out from last time. So we're going to need one to test this out with today. All right, now we'll step on that remote controller and use it. All right, so looking at the little diamond formation of buttons on my controller, we're going to move the ball this way. Whoops, and right around it.
Fantastic.
There we go. So that time we were able to get 3 in a row within that 2-second window. And now if we do this, at this point 2 seconds have elapsed. So it didn't do that.
Fantastic.
That time we got 3 in a row, so that time it worked. So that's the Narration Announcer. It's pretty easy to use, although again, its uses are limited because of the limited number of phrases that are available. And that ball is still bouncing around out there. That's funny. It's scoring and I'm not even doing anything. I love it. But anyway, next time we'll finish building the rest of this pinball game. Until then, I want to thank you for watching my video today. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done that already, and leave a comment to let me know what you think of this pinball game so far. That's all for me today. Have a great weekend.